Well, welcome back. For those of you who weren't here yesterday, I'm John Sanford, one of the 3 co-PIs of TechSAge, and I'm going to, as Elena said, introduce the speakers for the support, safety, and independence in everyday home activities session. Our first speaker is Marcia Finlayson. She is the Vice Dean of Health Sciences and Director of the School of Rehabilitation Therapy at Queen's University in Canada. Second, and Marcia will be doing a remote presentation. Laura Rice is our second presenter. She's an associate professor in the Department of Kinesiology and Community Health at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And Laura is also one of the TechSAge principal investigators. And our third speaker will be Michael Phillips, and I believe Michael is also remote. And he's the Technology Strategy and Relationships Director at AARP. So in order not for me to have any more malfunctions on the computer, Elena is going to be doing the technical aspects, and I will just be doing the introductory aspects and the questions and answers section.
Thank you, John. So Marcia, I will invite you to share your screen. I will stop sharing mine.
All right. Okay, so are you seeing full view? Yes.
Yes, I'm going to pin you in Spotlight. Excellent, you are good to go.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, so first of all, I'd like to just say thanks to the members of the TechSAge team for inviting me to do this presentation, and also for the opportunity to serve on the advisory board. It's been really great to be involved with this project and see all the great work that's coming out. I'm really sorry that I couldn't be in Chicago for this event. But at the time the invitation came, crossing the border was a little bit more complicated than it is now. So such is life. So when I was asked to address this topic of supporting safety and independence for everyday home activities, I really, I went back and forth with Elena a few times in terms of thinking about what this should look like. And where I landed was really decide, rather than focusing on any specific individual project that I've been involved in, more taking a 30,000-foot view in terms of where are we now, what do we know, and what might be the priorities. Because given that this State of the Science conference is really about setting research priorities moving forward, I wanted to do more of an overarching view on where we are now and where we might want to get to. So the way I've organized my presentation is to look at the components of this session. So everyday home activities, look at safety and independence, and then use of technology to support safety and independence for everyday home activities. And my particular area of expertise is working with people with multiple sclerosis, particularly people who are aging with the disease. And so that's the focus that I am going to take in the rest of this presentation. And I hope you don't hear a little growling dog at the back, because the little puppy that's rolling around playing with her toys, she was sleeping until I started talking. So in putting together this presentation, I set myself a couple of guiding questions just to help focus what I wanted to be able to address. So first of all, I really want to take a look at, is what do we know about the everyday home activities of people aging with MS, and particularly those activities that they want to do, they either need to do, or they struggle to do. The other thing that I wanted to take a look at is how should we be thinking about safety and independence as people aging with MS participate in everyday home activities. And I'm just going to put my bias on the table here, is I've always been really uncomfortable with the term independence, because I think it carries a lot of societal expectations with it that maybe we may need to rethink. So I wanted to take a look at these terms and how should we be thinking about them. And then last, I wanted to take a look at is what do we know about the use of technology to support engagement in everyday home activities among people aging with MS? And ultimately, when looking at these three things, like what are the research priorities at the intersection of these topics? So that's where I'm heading today. So first of all, let's take a look at everyday home activities. So if we take a more epidemiological descriptive perspective, what are people doing, when, where, why? What's really striking to me when you look at the MS literature, MS literature in general, and specifically related to aging, is there's actually very limited description of what people are doing. What do they want to do? What do they need to do? What are they expected to do? The struggles to do, we describe a little bit better, but there's actually remarkably little literature about just everyday home living among people with MS, and in particularly older adults. Instead, what you tend to see is symptom profiles. People with MS and aging with MS have high levels of fatigue. They have difficulty with mobility. Some have difficulty with transfers, those kinds of things. But we're not really seeing a more activity and participation description. If, in fact, we do see descriptions of everyday home activities, they tend towards a more traditional functional status type view, and also towards composite scores. So you see things like scores on the Barthel or the CATS or FIM or any other number of different things. And when you take a step back from the current literature, and when I was reviewing it in preparation for this, the things that really struck me were three things that are quite invisible in the literature about everyday home activities among people with MS and aging with MS. First is the impact of time. So when I think about using technology and I think about safety and I think about everyday home activities, the thing that comes to my mind is how long does it take to do an everyday home activity? And is that amount of time the way people want to spend their time? But you don't see that in the literature. And I have a little dog that's going to bark. I'm going to close my door. Hazards of remote presentations, right? At least she's not sitting on my lap yet. So you might see that eventually. But so the impact of time, like how long does it take to do a particular activity, like getting dressed in the morning or preparing a meal or doing laundry? And is that the way people want to spend their time? Do they think that that's an efficient use of time? What's the impact of that time versus doing something else? It's absent in the literature on aging with MS and everyday home activities. The other piece that is about time that's invisible in the literature is a more longitudinal perspective. So when you actually see descriptions of everyday home activities, what you see is cross-sectional studies. So whether it's qualitative interviews or survey or, even an intervention study that's before and after, it's like, okay, here's what they're able to do right now. But we know MS is a progressive disease and it changes, it varies over time. And yet we've only got these snapshot views. So I found this quite striking. The other thing that's absent in this literature when it exists is the role of technology. So are people using equipment? Are they using it well? Are they using equipment that fits? Does it help them? And last of all, safety. You don't see this in the literature. And it's really not until I was doing this presentation and preparing for this presentation and really taking a look at that these things really jumped out to me as really quite strikingly absent in the literature. So what do we actually see? So there are some studies that describe, as I said, more sort of functional status, typical measures. And so I just pulled out 3 here to give us like a broad overview. So the first one, Manson and Lexel, this is a study from Sweden, and they used the functional independence measure. And fortunately, one of the things that they did is they actually gave scores on individual items. So you could see what kinds of areas people were having difficulty with. But I think what's important here is when you look at the way they scored, so scores of 6 or 7 on the FIM are reflect modified or completely independent. We actually see fairly high levels, or high proportions of people who have high levels of independence on some of these really basic ADL skills. And if you look, the second study, the basket, they used the Barthel. They didn't report individual items, but instead what they did is they clustered things together and they did a summary. And what you see again is fairly high levels of people being able to do most of what they needed to do on an everyday basis. And so for those of you who are not familiar with these measures, the FIM is about capturing need for assistance in self-care activities. And it's really intended to be used to capture changes over the course of inpatient rehab programs. The Barthel Index similarly is The Barthel Index similarly is focused on need for assistance, and again, higher number of higher numbers on it reflect greater independence. So the other study is one that I did many years ago, 20 years ago, which was kind of shocking when I pulled that out, it was actually a summary of 3 separate studies that were done looking at people aging with MS and their profile. It was a study, a summary on their health and social profile. And so one of the pieces of this was to look at what the activities people were doing and what they were able to do with or without assistance. And what you see here, the variability, is a reflection of the paper captured 3 separate studies, and it was a compilation. But again, what you see, depending on the activity, there's a fair number of people who are able to do everyday activities without assistance. So when I think about the epidemiological pieces, or the use of scales, we're the researchers are the ones that are saying, well, these are the items that, we need to know whether or not people can do or not. And so I really wanted to take a look at, well, what do people with MS and aging with MS say that they want to be able to do? And so what I've done is I've pulled from 2 intervention studies that I was leading or have been leading the last couple of years. And the papers were written up by 2 former postdocs. And one of the, just like Joy was saying in her self-management intervention, and hi Joy, it's nice to see you again. We use a lot of goal setting in the interventions that we do. And the intervention work that I mostly do is looking at enabling people with MS to manage the symptom of fatigue, because it's one of the things that stops them from doing everyday activities. So we did a study, again, group-based self-management. We had a teleconference trial a number of years ago, and we had people submit goals. So they were doing goals every week, but we had them submit them. And we ended up with almost 500 goals that we coded against the occupational therapy framework. And more recently, we've been doing an online version of the fatigue management program. And we were finding that there were some people who were really struggling with a completely online version. So we added a one-to-one coaching element. And it was a feasibility study. Again, we got people to submit their goals. And this time we coded them against the ICF. And so in these goals, what we did is we went and had a look at what is it people wanted to be able to do. And what we found is the goals that they set were primarily around instrumental activities to care for themselves, both home and health. So home things were, it was interesting. It was a lot of like, get my kitchen organized, or get my workshop organized, or stick to a schedule for exercise, or managing, different strategies they wanted to do to manage their health. Under the engage in recreation and leisure activities, these were things like getting back to hobbies that they really enjoyed. And for whatever reason in these trials, people were really big into scrapbooking, but that's what we had. And then also carrying out daily routines. So these were the things that people, in terms of symptom management, they wanted to manage their symptoms so they could do these things. In the coaching study, we asked them about what were the factors that were helping them achieve their goals. And the second most common thing was assistive technology. So that enabled them to do the things that they needed to do and help them manage their fatigue to engage in everyday home activities. So when you take these two things together, the more epidemiological perspective and the goals that people with MS are identified, here are the questions that came to my mind that we need to explore moving forward. So just what exactly is it that people aging with MS are doing? So, and to what extent are they satisfied with what, when, and how their doing is occurring? Do they feel safe in their everyday home activities? And are they using technology to support those activities? And probably, of real interest to me is the technology working the way they want and expect? Because I'm not seeing that in the aging with MS literature. The other question I have is, how do home activity profiles evolve over time, and what's driving that change? It's probably a combination of all of these things, but is it symptom changes? Is it the availability or capacity of caregivers, which we're going to hear about in the next session? Is it environmental changes? Is it the technology itself? And fundamentally, what are the real critical issues about understanding everyday home activities? Is it about independence? Is it about time? Is it safety? Is it something else? So things to ponder. So then the next element is looking at independence and safety. And as I've said, I've already identified that I'm fairly uncomfortable with the term independence, because I think it has a lot of social perspectives that are not always particularly beneficial to people with disability or aging with disability. So I started this to say, like, what is independence? And I decided that I was going to explicitly look for concept analyses. And a concept analysis, for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's a research method. It's very more common in philosophy and in linguistics, but it's becoming more common in the health sciences, particularly at nursing. And really what it is to systematically describe the way a term is used in everyday language. And what you look for is, what are the antecedents to the term, like what comes before, what comes after, and what are the core elements. So I did find concept analysis of independence. And what's really interesting, that the consequences isn't particularly surprising. I think we could have all said, an independent person is one who's able to perform self-care and daily activities without the help of others. Interestingly, no comment on whether or not they're using, technology to help. But the antecedents, there's multiple antecedents. Like, in order to be independent, there's issues around financial capacity, which has been raised by previous speakers. Physical capacity. And the attributes of independence is really about the physical condition. In looking at this concept analysis, one of the things that they talk about is that actually independence is an attribute of autonomy, which is a term that I much prefer. And so I thought, okay, well, let's go down that rabbit hole and see if there's a concept analysis about autonomy. And there's a couple of different ones. One of them is specific to older adults, so they're living in residential settings. So I've put the two together, and I've highlighted the terms that really stood out for me in terms of thinking about technology and everyday home activities. And first of all, I really like the attributes about involved in decision-making. You need to have knowledge to be autonomous. You need to be flexible because it might not always go the way you hope or expect. And being autonomous also means that you can delegate care needs. And I find that really intriguing, especially when you think about issues of time and evolution over time for everyday home activities. The antecedents also intrigue me in terms of experience, which implies that if you're going to be autonomous, you have to have some level of experience to be able to do things like make decisions, flexibility, delegation of care needs. So I bring these forward just because I think they're really important for us to think about. So I went and then took a look at, well, how does in the MS literature we talk about autonomy? Well, we don't really talk about autonomy in the MS literature. We talk about patient autonomy, which patient is a term that kind of makes my skin crawl, given that most of my work is in the community. But in the MS literature, we talk about patient autonomy as an antecedent to shared decision-making, which mostly is related to disease-modifying medications, but it really made me think about shared decision-making, the role of shared decision-making in obtaining technology. And some of the key prerequisites, or we may want to think about them as antecedents to patient autonomy, are again, things like self-efficacy, confidence to be able to make decisions, being able to seek information and having knowledge to inform those things, really being clear about your own personal values and how much control you want to have over the process. And the last two things, uncertainty tolerance and risk knowledge, attribution, and tolerance were really important. And this made me think about the issue of safety, because I couldn't find anything on home safety in terms of a concept analysis, but it seems to me from my clinical experience as an occupational therapist that safety is kind of in the eyes of the beholder, and what I think is safe and what some of the clients that I've worked with over time think is safe are not necessarily the same thing. And it's really more an issue of risk and risk tolerance and whether people are knowledgeable in terms of, being able to weigh out risks and make independent choices or autonomous choices, shall we say. So the questions I think are in this area are first, how does technology alter perceptions of independence and autonomy during home activities for people aging with MS? To what extent does safety and risk play into technology selection decisions? And to what extent does the selection of technology for everyday home activities apply a shared decision-making approach? And whether those antecedents that I mentioned, like knowledge, uncertainty, and risk tolerance, are those considered in that process? So again, things to consider. So then the last piece is technology, and I want to acknowledge here that the work I'm about to present has been very much driven by two of my doctoral students, Alexander Jackson, who I believe is on the call today, and Rebecca Sandu. So we've been working through a scoping review. It's still in process, so I can't even say this is hot off the presses because we're still kind of working through a few things. But our question was, what's currently known about the experience of using assistive technology for supporting participation in activities of daily living? And it was specifically at home and in the community for community dwelling older adults. So there's some information there about our search and selection, but we were very clear that what we were looking for was use of technology in everyday home activities. Okay, we didn't want to be looking at things that we're testing in the lab or, just trying to figure out, whether or not it was even feasible. So this is a summary of the process we've gone through so far. We ended up with 29 papers. In some ways, it was a little bit more than I expected. And the different items that we extracted are there for you. So what about these 29 papers? What did we find? So we ended up finding 18 peer-reviewed studies, primarily descriptive, and we also had 11 consumer magazines. And we debated about whether or not to include these, but in the end, we did because it tended to have very practical advice about use of technology in everyday activities. And that's really what we were interested in. So in the consumer magazines, what we saw a lot of was people talking about, and usually it was people with MS were being interviewed by a reporter and then they were writing it up. So what are the options for assistive technology and home modifications so you can stay living in your home? You know, what are the things you need to think about when you're acquiring technology and how do you actually acquire it? And what are your experiences of use and sort of the good, bad, and the ugly? And then the 18 peer-reviewed studies, like I said, primarily descriptive, a lot of qualitative work, survey kinds of work. And what we found was sort of like three broad areas of topics. First of all, the usability, again, good, bad, and ugly of using it. How other people in their world reacted to them using the technology, a lot of things about stigma, technology, both from internal stigma and what they saw in the rest of the community, and also the impact on self and everyday life. So one of the things we extracted was how people were actually using the technology for what activities. And so we used what's called the PEO model, person, environment, occupation model, to code the activities, just so we could group them together in like sort of a more summary sort of format. And so activities that technology was being used for were coded as self-care, productivity, or leisure. And productivity would include things like work and volunteer, but also productive occupations around the home. That would be things like, you know, meal preparation, more IADL kinds of things. And what you see here is a real focus on self-care and leisure, which kind of surprised me actually, and much less so on productivity. The other thing that we found was the types of technology that are being addressed were actually incredibly limited. A lot of stuff about mobility devices, which I suppose is not particularly surprising, but you know, not as much technology diversity as we might hope. I see the 5-minute warning there. So the core themes that came out of the literature are these 5. We're still working through these, so I'm not going to go into these in a lot of detail, but I am going to focus on one in particular, given the time limits. And that is about the processes and temporal factors. So I've already mentioned the time factor, but we actually saw this quite a bit in the literature, because the processes and temporal factors associated with the use of AT were things like the process to decide to use it, the realization that technology was needing it, the process of finding and adapting to the funding the AT, finding it. And then given that it was MS, the other thing we found was fairly common was discussions about the temporal progressive nature of MS, and then how the AT used to work and now doesn't, and how do you change that? So the temporal stuff was really very interesting. And I keep going back to it because I think it's something that we need to give more thought to if we're going to advance the research in this area. So where are our research opportunities related to technology for people aging with MS specific to home activities? So first of all, what technology devices do people aging with MS have and use regularly? We don't actually know that. And what led them to acquire these items? How, when, and from whom did they acquire their technology? Because we all know that there's lots of different ways of getting it, and some of it is in your grandma's cupboard. Then is technology being used to meet functional needs and expectations? And how is it updated as needs change? So in summary, if we look back, what do we know now? We know that there are a fair number of people with MS who need some kind of assistance to complete many everyday home activities. And those are more higher for IADL compared to ADL. We know that there are things that people from our intervention work, that they want and need to be able to do, and they're setting goals to be able to do that, particularly related to self-care and leisure activities. And based on the concept analysis, I think one of the things that we know is we may need to be really careful and reconsider our use of terms like safety and independence, and maybe think about using terms like autonomy and risk. So what do we not know, and what does this mean for going forward? We've got really significant and basic gaps in everyday home activity, understanding everyday home activities, and understanding the relationship between independence, autonomy, safety, and risk, and how those things are influenced by technology. So here's my final thoughts. What do we need to consider in terms of our research opportunity? I think we need to reconsider and redefine or refine core conceptual assumptions and really think more about really theorizing what's going on. I think we need some really foundational description so we know where we're at. And I think we need a much stronger attention to the role of time, both cross-sectionally in terms of individual activities and longitudinally, which really lends itself to really needing to expand our interdisciplinary perspectives. And there we go. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcia. That was wonderful. I find it amazing that we've come so far in, say, 30 years, and we really not come that far at all.
Yeah.
We're basically asking the same questions.
Yeah.
We know a little bit more, but I guess not that much.
Yeah.
I also think I like your idea of rethinking independence. I've long thought that for Neidler, for example, independence means being able to do stuff by yourself. For older adults, it usually means not going to a nursing home.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you put those two things together in terms of aging with a long-term disability?
Mm-hmm. So
it's given us a lot to think about. And we have about 5 minutes for questions. So is there anybody here in the room who has questions, or anyone online? No questions online? I also think, let me just say one more thing, the whole idea of time being important. And I think back to a study actually that Joy and I did a number of years ago, actually back when you were still in Chicago. And we found that personal hygiene modifications, we did a pre-post study, and we found that personal hygiene modifications, things like toilet grab bars and raised toilets and modifying bathtubs, had the highest, and Joy probably knows the data better than me since she did more of the analysis, but those modifications accounted more for people going out into the community more often and further out than any modifications, including ramps and lifts on the front of houses.
Yeah. So
you might think of that as, well, if it took me less time to do all these things, I'd have more time to go out. So being able to do things in a timely manner, although we never really looked at that, we never followed up because that wasn't part of the study, but we always thought that that might be one of the logical explanations for why bathroom modifications were so important.
Well, so, and I think certainly in the MS world, the time, especially given the issues around fatigue, time really matters, because if you're spending a lot of energy to do what might typically be considered a pretty basic activity, that means you don't have the energy to do the stuff that you really want to do. I remember that study, and I remember talking to Joy and you about that study, and it has stuck with me. But it isn't something that a lot of people talk about. And I think we probably need to be talking about it more, because I think that may be one of the outcomes we need to think about when we're using technology to support everyday activity. Like, are we giving people back time that they can use for things that are really meaningful and important to them?
Maybe we could go Joy into actually publishing that. Because it really is one of the few studies that looked at the impact of modification.
Marcia, this is Wendy Rogers. I loved your talk. I took many pages of notes. I'm so excited because one of the groups that we're including in the Access study, as you know, because you are one of our subject matter experts, is MS.
Yes.
And I think we're going to be able to tap into a lot of the things that you were saying are gaps in the literature.
Yes.
We've had a great response for participants wanting to participate in that interview study. So we're well on the way of completing that sample. So I'm excited.
Yeah, and I'm really excited about that. Certainly my experience in working with people aging with MS is they're so excited to be asked to participate in a study, because so many typical MS studies and MS rehab studies focus on people under 65. And so they're like, oh, I'm so glad you've asked me. So I'm very excited to see some of the stuff you guys come up with.
Any other comments?
Thank you so much for this presentation. I also am very interested in the concept of time, not so much from the MS population, but from older adults, which is where I practice. We do a lot of CATs and Barthel Index in the clinic, and I can ask someone, are you able to cook and clean? Yes, they are. And then if I dig a little deeper, it's like, oh, but if I have all day, I can do it, you know? So I'm just wondering if you could suggest some tools for measuring time, or have you thought about that?
No,
Technology
no,
or not?
I haven't given it a lot of thought at this point. I think you know, one of the things I've got really a methodology I've got really curious about is experience sampling method and ecological momentary assessment. And I kind of wonder whether or not those methods could be used for understanding time factor a little bit better. You know, it's not maybe a traditional tool. And I think there's the other issue is like, how much time are people prepared to spend on these things? Because that's going to be different across people, right? Depending on what else is going on in their life. So sorry, I can't give you here's a great tool to use.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
He's going to swap us back over, and where Rice is our next presenter.
Ooh, that's a lot of orange. That's the official.
Thank you, Laura. All yours.
All right.
It should be okay. Why is it so? There you go. It
So
changes
down-
for every user.
down here.
Yes.
Okay, all right. All right, so thank you so much. I appreciate you inviting me today to speak. Also, Marcia, I wanted to just say it's a real honor to be presenting after you. When I was a new assistant professor and starting to go down this field of fall management, I really studied your work closely. So I feel very honored to be presenting after you. So what we're going to talk about today, first of all, talk about the idea of falls among individuals who use wheelchairs and scooters. First, give you a little bit of the foundational information, but spend most of my time today talking about how technology can be used to prevent and manage falls, and also look at fall recovery as well. So just want to thank my research sponsors. Also wanted to thank my collaborators. Jake is here with me today, but I have a great group and I'm so wonderful to, so fortunate to be involved with such great people. Okay, so just to kind of set the stage so we're on the same page when we're talking about falls. So fall is inadvertently coming to rest on the ground floor or other lower level, excluding intentional change in position to rest, essentially. So we're talking about things that people are doing during their day-to-day activities. One thing we specifically don't look at is sports, so falls that occur during sporting activities. Very important, but just kind of a different animal than we're looking at in this research. So falls. So we know a lot about falls among older adults, especially those who ambulate. And this is a significant problem. A lot of research, a lot of funding has been put forth to examine this problem. But there's a lot of other populations that we need to consider. So for example, individuals living with spinal cord injury who ambulate, about 80% of them fall at least once each year. And then the group of people that I examine are individuals who use wheelchairs and scooters. And this percentage is also very high. So a study done back in 1994 looking at community dwelling manual wheelchair users found about 60% were experiencing at least one fall per year. A recent systematic review among individuals living with spinal cord injury found about 70% were falling at least once per year. And then my lab studied individuals living with MS, and we found about 75% experienced at least one fall in a 6-month period of time. But unfortunately, a very, very understudied group. So what happens when a fall? So kind of, I don't know, obvious things maybe first. So physical consequences, things like bruises, fractures, concussions, and that can result in pretty significant things, things like extended bed rest or even death. And when I first started studying this, that was what I was really focused on, these physical consequences of falls. But now that I've had a better opportunity to interact with participants, really understand the problem better, something at least equally important, if not more important, is the idea of fear of falling. So unfortunately, we have to borrow a lot from the ambulatory literature on this topic, but we find that fear of falling is associated with activity limitations, diminished performance of activities of daily living, community participation, and reduced quality of life. But my lab a few years ago, we did study individuals who use wheelchairs. We had about 68 participants in this study, and over 60% reported that they did have a fear of falling. But more importantly, about half of those individuals reported that they stopped doing activities that they liked to do or they needed to do in their daily life because of a fear, not even because of a fall that they experienced, just having this fear of falling. And we also found a relationship between as fear of falling increases, quality of life decreases, and also control over participation. And it's really this vicious circle. After somebody experiences a fall, they'll have a decline in their confidence. This increases their fear of falling, decreases their activity, more physical decline. Maybe they'll have a fall. And so the cycle just keeps going and going. So another important thing that we need to consider is this idea of a critical fall. So by definition, I feel like all falls are critical, but by definition, this is needing assistance to get back up after you experience a fall. And so this can result in people being on the ground for an extended period of time, either an initial delayed recovery, just about 10 minutes, or a long lie period, about an hour or so. And while 10 minutes maybe doesn't sound like a long period of time, especially for an individual maybe with limited sensation, perhaps an individual with a spinal cord injury, being on the ground, you can get a pressure ulcer really, really quickly. Or if it's February and you're in your garage and you've fallen, that can be a significant problem. So we did do some research among individuals who use wheelchairs, and we found that almost 80% of individuals need assistance to get back up to recover from a fall. And this is compared to about 50% of ambulatory adults. And we also found that among manual wheelchair users, people who needed assistance to recover had significantly lower reports of community participation compared to those who can recover independently. So it certainly can result in things like poor quality of life, serious injuries, or even death. Okay, so there's a lot of problems here. So falls are common. They can have a substantial impact on the person's life, and people often do need help to recover. Another problem is that there are very limited interventions and outcome measures to manage this problem. And Jake and I did a systematic review on this topic and kind of confirmed our thoughts on this idea. So we've done a lot of work over the years trying to understand the problems, both quantitative and qualitative studies, trying to get at, what are the circumstances surrounding falls. We also compared different populations, and we found out a lot of really great information, very specifics, how, where, when, kind of why. But really kind of the biggest thing at the end of the day, kind of a take-home message, was these falls are multifaceted. They are not occurring in isolation. There's so many different things that are coming into play when a person experiences a fall. So when we're doing an intervention, we really need to take into consideration these various components of falling. So we'll move on to actually what we're doing to try to prevent and manage falls. So again, we've done quite a few pilot studies. First, a study specifically among individuals with MS, and then individuals living with spinal cord injury. And this pilot work really helped us to kind of hone our skills to understand, what is working best for an intervention. So we landed on a program, and we call it IROLL, Individualized Reduction of Falls. And this is actually very similar to kind of the structure of the ENGAGE study. So it was great to kind of see similar methods being used. So this study was funded by the National Multiple Sclerosis Society. So it was specifically tailored to individuals living with MS. But it is a group-based intervention. We have about 2 to 5 participants per group. It's a 6-week program. So there's 2 hours of content per week, so 12 hours total. So this is our opportunity to be able to get all these factors into the program. And we use a lot of the same strategies, goal setting, journaling, action planning, self-management that were discussed. So I'm glad you went first, because you laid all this great groundwork for me. And our intervention is also led by licensed therapists, OTs or PTs. And we, as far as our theoretical foundations, we use the health belief model, and then self-efficacy and social learning. So I'm not going to go into the details of the intervention today. I don't have time, but I have a whole almost 2-hour presentation on that if you would like to see that. So very similar to the ENGAGE study, we started off in person. This was funded in 2017. We were kind of going along, and then COVID hit. And the study was moved online. And so while COVID did accelerate our move to an online platform, this actually was something that we had been talking about previously. So we had a lot of people who were interested in participating, but they had trouble with the transportation. And I wish I knew and we did it in Atlanta, we did it in Chicago, and we did it in Champaign. So I wish I would have known more about the transportation resources in Atlanta, but regardless, urban or rural, people had unique challenges actually getting to the study location. There are also people that kind of found out of us who live in Tennessee. And so we were trying to get people in. So moving online actually was a way to help increase our access, increase our reach of the study. So IROLL is a hybrid program. We have asynchronous and synchronous components. So the asynchronous is pre-recorded video content, about 60 minutes total, but we have it broken down into nice chunks to facilitate learning. We also do a lot of goal setting, having people do journal entries, worksheets. And we asked for the asynchronous materials to be completed prior to a synchronous meeting, which occurs once a week with that licensed professional. And while there is some scripted content to the intervention, it is mostly a discussion. So talking about, okay, so, what did you think about this? What are some of your individual challenges? And there's a lot of peer support, a lot of learning that goes on. I did a lot of these interventions and it was great. I felt like I learned a lot during the sessions, and the participants were great with each other. So just to move along, I just want to give you a slight reference for the study so you have a framework when you're thinking about the results. So kind of a baseline testing, then the intervention. We tested the participants immediately afterwards, and then had a 3-month follow-up after that occurred. And people were tracking the frequency of their falls throughout the entire period. So we had 18 participants who had been living with MS for a long time, about 30 years, and also kind of almost fit into this older adult category as well. So we did not see any changes in fall incidents, but we did have a lot of people talk about they felt like a lot of their near falls were reduced. And we just had a 3-month period. So I potentially think that longer, if we could follow up longer, we might see more of an added benefit. But we did see a significant reduction in fear of falling. And then we also saw improvements in knowledge of fall prevention strategies. People, again, kind of these two people were talking about how they had a lot more confidence in the activities that they were doing. We didn't see any changes in quality of life and community participation. This also was in the middle of COVID, so we weren't really that surprised. It's something we're going to investigate further, but not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater over this one because we had such a unique circumstance. One thing that we didn't see was changes in functional mobility. We did see this when we did the in-person intervention where the therapist had more opportunity to interact. So that is something we're definitely going to investigate further. But a lot of improvements in self-efficacy and self-advocacy. So we did recently get funding from the Kinesiology Foundation to continue this on. So we are planning to translate this to a mobile app. And we're using a lot of the feedback from the participants to help improve, to integrate more social connectedness, a lot of the different things that we've been talking about all day here. So just quickly, I know I just have a few minutes, so I'm just going to talk about kind of a second component that I'm doing, automated fall detection devices. So if you remember, I talked in the beginning about this idea of critical falls and a lot of people needing assistance to get back up. So this is a really important thing, again, to help people increase their confidence, to feel like they can do activities both in their home and their community, but kind of have a safeguard if they do experience a fall. So you might be saying, oh, but there's already these things on the market, but they really haven't been designed. They are, but they really haven't been designed for people who use wheelchairs and scooters. There are devices you can trigger manually, but the research says that people really don't use those too often. They don't want to bother their family. And then the automated devices have very poor reliability for individuals who are in wheelchairs and scooters. So we really want to have a product that can reliably and in an automated fashion summon assistance when a fall occurs. Also allow the end user to select who is called. So in a lot of devices, you can only call like 911. We want people to be able to make that decision for themselves and not be device specific. So a lot of people change devices throughout the day. So we want something to go with the person. So we started off, we looked at actually what fall patterns look like among wheelchair and scooter users. And then we developed an algorithm to kind of be able to determine what a fall looks like from a wheelchair. We also talked to participants about their preferences, and they really wanted the device to be in a watch form and a usable watch where they could actually tell the time and use some other functions. So that is what we landed on. So we are integrating the algorithm onto a commercially available smartwatch, the TIC3 watch. And these are some kind of screenshots of the of the app, both on the phone, it's on the phone and then on the watch. I have my demo again today. I'd be happy to show it to you if you would like. So we're about to start our field testing with this. There's a few more bugs we need to work out, but we are almost there. And then, sorry, the key part that I didn't talk about was when the device senses that a fall occurs, a text message is sent to their preferred care partner to let them know that a fall has occurred. And so in the future, I hope to be able to integrate these programs further. So use the fall detection device to kind of feed information into a system so we can better understand what type of education a person needs, if it's post-intervention, when it's time to have a refresher, when it's time to go back to the healthcare provider, so that more education or different types of interventions can be implemented. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions or comments? Well, I moved away from you because it'll give you feedback if you're close to that. So I'm going to make you close to that.
Okay, well, thank you, Laura, for your great presentation. I also really enjoyed your demo yesterday.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for giving the supplemental information. So I was thinking back on your slide about sort of the lack of positive changes that you've seen in perhaps of functional mobility,
Yeah.
and also combined with your thoughts about, we know that falls are multifaceted. And so I wonder, or if you have any more data or insight on kind of the other PT or other rehab services that they might have been receiving in addition to the, or if they have not been receiving any, which might have contributed to maybe the.
Right. So that's a great point. Yeah. So, we didn't put any restrictions on people, like you can't do PT, you can't do anything else. We kind of just let them, do their thing. So that's a good point. During COVID, they probably were less likely to be going out. Another thing that we do in the intervention, because while 12 hours sounds like a lot of time, it's really not. So if people are really interested in building a specific skill, we are very quick to say, hey, you should go see a PT, you should go see an OT. We tell them what language they use to tell their doctor what they need so that they can really advocate for themselves. And so again, that also wasn't happening. And I know specifically people, I would talk to people about that and they say, yeah, that's great. I really want to learn more about doing this type of transfer, but I can't. I don't feel comfortable going to an outpatient clinic right now.
So there's a question in the chat that you could pull up.
Can you help me?
She knew that was going to happen. So
Yeah.
she was standing by.
Yeah. There we go. Okay, so what are the main risk factors that high prevalence of falling? Yeah, what are the main risk factors that affect the high prevalence of falling among wheelchair users comparing non-wheelchair users? You mentioned some aspects briefly in your presentation, but can you explain more? So as far as risk factors, I will say we haven't done like a large scale study that we can truly call something a risk factor, but as far as circumstances that surrounding falls, so some of the big things are falls frequently occur during transfer activities, reaching outside your base of support. We actually interestingly found that a lot of people experience falls while walking, despite the fact that everybody in the study was an individual who used a wheelchair on a full-time basis. When we looked more into this, people were like, yes, but to get to my bathroom, I had to get up and take a couple steps because it just wasn't accessible. And so they're doing the furniture surfing, they're maybe not even able to use like a walker. So a lot of those falls still occur. So that's actually something we still keep in the program. We talk about, well, number one, try to make your living environment accessible. But number two, if you can't, these are some ways that you can help make it safer. But if you send me an email, I can send you the different papers where we specifically pulled out these circumstances. Thank you.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So your study, like most other studies I've seen about falls for ambulatory individuals, didn't show that there was a decrease in incidence. But it does show that, like most studies, that there is a decrease in risk on fear of falls. So do you think that maybe we're looking at the wrong measure, and that perhaps people are either walking more or wheeling more, and that falls incidence should be really looked at the amount of time that people are either ambulating or wheeling and where they're doing it?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Yeah, and again, I think that was my main focus early on, but like I said, I think fear of falling and participation, those are so much more important things. In the in-person study, we had this one participant talk about, he was so excited. His daughter was on the swim team. He was always very afraid to go to her practices or her meets, but he was able to go after the program. Well, he felt more confident to go. And I mean, that's really hard to measure, but it's an important thing. And that's why we do the qualitative aspect of it as well. So we can pull out these components that are hard to measure quantitatively. But yeah, I agree. It's the actual incidence is maybe not the key thing that we need to lead with. I think we should still measure it, but I don't think it's the key thing to lead with.
Okay, well, thank you. I want to thank all of you. You're right. We have another remote presenter. I got so wrapped up in the last two.
So Michael, I'm going to make you a co-host. Can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me okay?
Excellent. Would you like to share your own slides?
Do you have them? I can
I've
go
been
in
happy
and-
to share for you.
That would be great. Thank you. And I just realized that I'm the only thing standing between everyone and lunch.
You are. Pressure's on to be engaging.
Yeah. So I really wish that I was there with you. These presentations have been fascinating, and I've really enjoyed them. Each one of them that I've heard today. This is a little bit different, of course, than a lot of the deep, impactful insights that have been shared. A little context: AARP has recently added digital equity as a strategic focus area, along with caregiving and Social Security and age discrimination and those types of strategic focus areas. And we see digital equity as being something that's important, is foundational for all of these things. There's been a lot of talk today about stakeholders, and we see our role at AARP as conveners across stakeholders, academia, as well as the tech industry that has the product, that has the availability, the platforms, the devices, the products to scale, and 50+ Americans, which is an incredibly broad, diverse group. If you know one 50+ American, you know one 50+ American. So it's an interesting place. It's great to hear all of the amazing research about different abilities and challenges that are happening. And I've learned a lot. The systemic opportunities to impact people with differing abilities is really important to us, and many of which are part of the whole aging process. We're thinking deeply about how about scaling these broad concepts and scaling across, in how government plays a role, how product companies and both big and emerging play a role, how nonprofits and academia can play a role in scaling to millions of people. And our goal here is to help people live, longer, happier, and more engaged lives. Slide. Everyone here kind of knows that do I have to hit it? Do I hit the slide or?
I'm working on it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
How about there?
Yeah, there we go. There we go.
Perfect.
So everyone here knows about the that aging and global populations, the growing of the longevity world is a mega trend that's affecting many things. One interesting fact to share, and I've heard several along these lines, are that adults 65 plus will outnumber children under the age of 18 by 2034, which is the first time that that's ever happened. Longer life expectancies is becoming a catalyst for change in many organizations, especially in the private sector, where the market opportunity usually drives these decisions. So we believe that it's very important to involve private sector and tech product companies in scaling solutions for meaningful change to millions of people. And we know that it's going to require ecosystems in order to do that. So next slide. And all of the data that I'm sharing here comes from the AARP Tech Trends Survey, which can easily be found by a quick Google search of AARP Tech Trends. Just sharing, we know the pandemic triggered a jump in tech usage. Smartphone adoption of the 50 plus population grew from 77% prior to the pandemic to over 85% now. We've seen jumps across all different types of devices. More than 1 in 3 older adults have home assistants in their house now. And it's not just devices, obviously, it's the applications and platform usage and skills that go along with that. Zoom is now a verb. The seal has been broken on telehealth, and both patients and even the most traditional minded clinicians have used telehealth and know how to use it. This is all really important to accessibility innovation as well, because a lot of it rides the rails of mainstream technology and devices. I was talking to an audiologist friend of mine who told me that half of her patient time was spent working with smartphone issues because of the apps that were involved. So I think that it's it all interrelates. Next slide. So we know the tech spend among 50 plus is growing. We expect in our research that tech spend by 2030 for older adults to be $108 billion market. It's going to surpass the average age annual spend of younger adults sometime around 2026, 2027. More than, and I think this is really important to what, like I said, the market case is critical to innovation, and the market case is important for companies that are creating these devices. The last presenter had a really great use case of using a smartwatch to incorporate research. I think we want to be a catalyst for enabling more and more of those types of stories. I've also highlighted a few devices on the right-hand side that are assistive and help to improve independence and mobility and safety. We're seeing those numbers drive up across the entire 50 plus market. So the more we have those types of devices in people's homes, the more innovation can kind of ride the rails of these devices, and the more comfortable people have with using technology. I'm going to skip the next slide just in the interest of time, because I want to talk a little bit about how situations matter. And this is an interesting conundrum that we're working on, how to tell the story with some of the companies that we're working with. So, for example, with home assistants, and just using this as kind of an example to make a case, we know that those who live alone and have a home assistant are twice as likely to use their home assistant as a companion than somebody who doesn't live alone. And if you go to the next slide, you see kind of the opposite, that people who live in families with 2 or more people are a lot more likely to have a home assistant in the house to begin with, or any connected device, as you can see from from this data. And what this points to is the nature of how mainstream technology and innovation really has to be seen through very very segmented eyes in order to be effective. And the tech industry has come to us, and I'm sure to you as well, wanting to understand how to create effective use cases and employ the research that's going to impact the most number of people. But in order to do that, understanding these types of situations and having the data behind it to really understand the size of the market and the barriers and the challenges and the opportunities are important to have those conversations. So next slide. We have just begun to build out a facets framework for older adults to help innovators and tech design teams define the broad contours of users, so that we've been working with human-centered design specialists at companies like Google and Citibank and Chewy and Expedia and Walgreens. And they're asking for help in expanding their accessible design practices to more broadly address the changing abilities with age, and the lifestyle variances and differing learning and adoption patterns that go along with non-digital natives. I've learned a lot today listening to these presentations about MS and fall prevention research and some of the findings in those areas. And if you think about all the different types of ability changes and independence variables, learning variables, and so forth, it becomes overwhelming really fast for innovators and human-centered design practitioners and inclusive design advocates to really know where to hone in for their product development. The other thing that, as we've been deconstructing some of these problems with the bigger tech companies is, realizing that there might be interest in having more inclusive design and bringing in some of the research and capabilities and opportunities to address changes in abilities, but there's not really an awareness within the design teams and with the product owners. They are very focused on accessibility compliance. So if it's a compliance issue that's in some of the accessibility standards that are out there, then there's a design check the box that's included, which is good. But I think what we're talking about here goes more broadly than just compliancy. So next slide. So as we look at age inclusive design and think about all of the different facets of age inclusive design, one thing that we're looking at is the full product life cycle. So it's real easy to go straight to the UI UX, the user experience design, and like I said, check the box on what the standards or best practices are. But that's not where people get tripped up all the time for adopting new technology and new innovation into their life. It's the acquisition, it's the learning, it's the integration with the other devices. It's where do I go for help and support. It's positive imagery and fun and positive language that makes people feel excited to use different features and functionality and offerings, rather than feel like it's they're a burden for having to use that. So really helping design teams understand the product lifecycle approach and include as many of these advancements that help different abilities is important. So next slide. And then just to take a step back and look at, I've heard a couple of different presenters talk about barriers, specifically within different disabilities and different products. Our framework is really from the research that we've been doing for several years on tech trends to understand what the barriers, the broader barriers to adopting technology are across, across the 50+ landscape. And we've narrowed it down to 5. And we realized that these 5 barriers, in order to increase digital equity, increase digital inclusion across the board, we have to address each of these 5 barriers separately. So next slide is a kind of just a map of how AARP specifically is addressing these barriers. Awareness and interest is the first barrier. If you don't know it exists, if you don't know something is available that will help you in your specific situation, then you'll never adopt it. So using our communication channels, our new Personal Technology Resource Center, and any way we can to raise awareness of the worthy technology advancements and innovation advancements that help people through the aging process is number 1. I think we've just kind of started to scratch the surface on that, and really thinking through how do people want to become aware of the innovations that help them specifically, and then scaling that. Second is access and cost. That's really an advocacy thing. Trust and privacy, making sure everyone trusts the technology that's there. Knowledge and support. We have recently affiliated with Oats and Senior Planet to put digital skills training into communities. And if you have interest in that, happy to connect you with our friends and colleagues at Oats and Senior Planet. And then what we were just talking about, expanding into industry opportunities for experience and design. We've also recently launched an age tech collaborative to help connect innovators, early stage startups that are building products around these challenges with investors. So if you have any students or colleagues or anyone around you that are in the early stages of a company or product, I encourage you to reach out to the Age Tech Collaborative. Next column. Tell you what, let's go to the last, the caregiving slide, and I will conclude with that. One more. I'll conclude here. Just a little thought about, we're taking, in this slide, we're taking kind of family caregivers and tech adoption as a sample. We know that there's we know that there's lots of different segments that need caring for, whether it be empty nesters or people who are starting to have cognitive decline, or people with mobility challenges or fall challenges. And we want to do deeper analysis on each of these segments. But as we're thinking about family caregivers, for example, knowing how big of a market it is, what are the biggest challenges. One thing that we see with family caregivers, about half are under the age of 50, mainly millennials, and they are providing caregivers, they're providing caregiving for older family members while they're working. They're very stressed because a lot of times they're caregiving for their children, their parents or older family members, and work. And most are not using any sophisticated technology solutions to help them. So the question that we have specifically for family caregiver, or key questions we're asking around family caregivers, are how can we expand the usage of technology? How can we support the younger generations of caregivers so that they feel more confident about providing care and influencing and helping people as they age? How does the delivery of health and wellness and telemedicine help reduce stress for caregivers so they're more effective in helping people? And how can technology promote and facilitate self-care? These are the types of questions I think that we're finding that the bigger tech companies are interested in pursuing in order to make a difference in their products. So it's kind of an entry point for us in the industry. And our hope is that there will just be a growing mindset and skill set shift to really shift towards incorporating more of these advancements into the mainstream products. So I might be a couple of minutes over, so I apologize. I hear stomachs growling.
Thank you so much. So now that the microphone's in my hand, I'm the one standing in the way, or sitting as the case might be, for everybody having lunch, but I'd like to give people the opportunity to ask Michael questions. And you can go eat lunch now. if you want.
Not yet, you're not dismissed.
Hey, Michael, this is Carolyn Phillips, your cousin, I'm sure.
Okay.
My question, so I'm often looking at this as a lot of folks who know me through two lenses, right? One is through training and access, acquisition, all of that. In the slide that you showed where you had listed, you said it was an awareness issue and then an acquisition issue. And then you showed the solutions. Were those in order? Is it indeed awareness is number one?
That's interesting, you know, because we kind of put this in different order for different audiences, and in this slide, it's in the order. Yes, it is in the order from the perspective of the consumer or patient, because they have, you know, first have to be aware. Second, they have to be able to access it. They have to have, you know, wireless internet or broadband internet. They have to trust it. They have to feel, and then they have to feel supported, and it has to be usable. And this is the framework to really integrate fully into somebody's, to really fully adopt and integrate into their lives.
Thank you. That is super helpful. The other question actually builds on this same slide. When John and I were in Seattle visiting some folks that y'all probably know, and one of the big questions that kept coming up with us, it goes to the privacy and trust. You know, how many questions do you really need? How much information do you really need? Why are you asking me all these questions about my life and this invasive kind of thing about what am I agreeing to and how long are you going to keep my information? So what are y'all doing from the policy side or the advocacy side on that? And I sure would love to join you in that effort. So if you're doing something good, if not, then let's figure it out.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. We're mainly looking at it from health data. We're not doing a lot with other personal data privacy, and they're related, but they're different. We have been sponsoring convenings around of other nonprofit organizations on what we should do, and, you know, HIPAA covers some things, and a lot of the B2C type technology is not HIPAA compliant, or doesn't have to be HIPAA compliant. So what should the world look like? And, you know, we're starting to congeal around this idea of super simple, easy recommendations on every tech product, like the ingredients, like the nutritional information that goes on food that you can look at in a standard format and know exactly what you're getting, what you're about to eat. You should have the same type of experience with giving away your data. It's such a conundrum because, especially with machine learning and deep learning and AI, having access to more data is going to generate, it's going to be a catalyst for more innovation, more predictive analytics, more support, but protecting people's, we're as an organization, we're more focused on protecting people's privacy. In our organization, I'm probably the one that's pushing more towards no, but we have to still enable innovation even as we protect people's health privacy as things accelerate.
Thank you, Michael. This is Wendy Rogers. It's so exciting to hear all of these initiatives at AARP. I want to take advantage of the fact that you are here with us today to ask you for a little bit of advice. We have many people in this room, and you've heard them comment. We've been working in this space of aging and disability and technology design for many, many years. How do we better engage industry to capitalize on and benefit from all of the knowledge that we have? How do we share that better? How do we engage them better?
Yeah, I think that's a really great opportunity for all of us. And that's what I was really thinking about in a broad sense as I was hearing the previous presentations. There's so much deep research and insights that you know, that needs to expand and scale through tech companies, and it's good to hear that people are in Seattle, because a lot of the decision makings happen in places like Seattle and the Bay Area, that we all have to live with for the future. And that's what, you know, we're hoping to be a catalyst to help bring everyone together more to share these insights, so that we're all creating a world that's better for everyone. But unfortunately, you know, a lot of this innovation, it comes to market through the form of products, and products have to have have to make money. So you know, it's navigating that together is going to be interesting. Would love to think more broadly on that, Wendy, and think about how we might do it more. One mega trend one trend that if you're not following is really important is the new ESG is ESG and CSR activity that's happening within tech companies and with the investment community. So the investment community is investing more in companies that are proving social impact. And I think our job is to figure out how to get the companies to prove social impact, so they can get more of the investments and build more capital that way. But you know, how we build those tracks to get the right measurements and get the right people looking at the right thing at the right time, it's complex.
Thank you, that's helpful.
All right. Were there any final questions? All right.
Everybody's hungry.
We're all hungry. Thank you so much, Michael. It was a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.